Good evening. I'm Erin Viner, and you're watching IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. We open in Turkey, where senior officials today announced that economic and military cooperation with Israel will be reduced in the coming period in the aftermath of this week's naval raid on a Gaza-bound flotilla of pro-Palestinians. Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan branded the raid as a heinous crime and is pushing for an international commission of inquiry into the raid on the so-called aid flotilla, which was organized by an Istanbul-based Islamic charity under the unofficial auspices of the Turkish government. And here at home, more than 1,000 people demonstrated in front of the Turkish embassy in Tel Aviv last night in support of Israel's right to self-defense. Protesters waved flags and chanted slogans defending the actions of IDF naval commandos during the dramatic pre-dawn raid on Monday. They also held aloft photographs of Erdogan depicted as Adolf Hitler and signs demanding that Turkey recognize its 1915 mass murder of Armenians as genocide. The protesters rejected the worldwide condemnation of Israel's actions during the Monday raid, pointing to the violent resistance that the security forces encountered from the ship's passengers, including wooden clubs, knives, heavy metal rods, and live fire from two pistols wrested from soldiers. 2 of the 7 wounded IDF soldiers were shot with guns that may have been taken from them, while a third was stabbed. According to investigators, there is increasing evidence that the flotilla activists dumped their own guns overboard during or after the raid. Gun sights and cartridge magazines incompatible with IDF weaponry were located on the Turkish Marmara ship. In addition, coded messages found aboard are also believed to detail contingency plans of how the flotilla activists plan to kill or kidnap IDF soldiers. Turkey this morning sent 2 airplanes to Israel to bring back 5 of its citizens remaining in the country after their detention for participation in the attempted breach of the Gaza naval blockade. The 5 were not included in yesterday's Turkish flights, returning other detained activists and the bodies of 8 Turkish fatalities due to injuries sustained in the clashes deemed too severe to risk transferring them. And meanwhile, in Istanbul, there was a massive demonstration for the 5th consecutive day as an estimated 10,000 protesters continued to condemn Israel's raid. Turkey's failure to join the European Union has resulted in Ankara's assuming a more militant and pro-Palestinian stance. This according to Dr. Jonathan Spire of the Global Research and International Affairs Center, speaking to IBA's Steve Leibowitz.
Prime Minister Erdogan has decided to make one of the factors in terms of his regional standing the issue of challenging Israel. Undoubtedly, it is the case that Turkey, under the AKP, under Erdogan, is making a strategic turn towards the region, towards the Middle East region. The Turkish desire since the end of the Cold War has been, of course, to join the EU. Turkey has seen itself as a European nation. I think the Turks are realizing that the EU door is going to remain more or less permanently closed to them. And as a result of that, Turkey is turning its ambitions eastward instead of westward. Now, the Turks, of course, in a way similar to the Iranian regime, have an immediate problem when they turn towards the Middle East, namely that they are not Arabs. But as with the Iranians, the one issue that trumps the Turks' essential foreignness in this neck of the woods, in this neighborhood, is the Israeli-Palestinian issue. If they can wave the banner of the Palestinians, that's the quickest shortcut to legitimacy. It looks like that's what Erdogan wants to do. He's been, in a certain sense, antagonizing the Israelis. We remember with President Peres on the stage at Davos and going on from there. He's been trying to antagonize Israel in a certain sense. I think in that respect, unfortunately, what took place this week with regard to the flotilla, in a sense, has given him a gift, and I have no doubt that he intends to use it to the fullness of the possibility there.
Was it a gift that he received or a gift that he sent? Because it seems to me as though Turkey was certainly in a position to stop the flotilla from sailing altogether. They could have shut it down when it was in port in Istanbul, and instead they chose, in effect, to allow it to go. And perhaps the next round, not this current flotilla, but the next round in the not-too-distant future, that they may even escort it with military vessels?
Well, there has been talk of that in Turkey. Of course, the opposition have spoken about it. Oppositions, by their very nature, can wave the flag and say what they want. The ones who make the decisions have to consider things more carefully. But yes, I think it is the case that the current Turkish government have taken a very different attitude to previous Turkish governments with regard to domestic Islamist organizations. It's important to remember that this IHH organization, which is the Turkish group, Turkish charity, Islamic charity, behind the flotilla is not an unknown factor. It's not a new factor. We've known about them for a while. This is an organization that has been involved since the early 90s in enabling Islamist fighters to take, young Islamists to take part in combat, also in Bosnia, also in Chechnya, also in Afghanistan. So it's a well-known factor. In the past, there was action by Turkish governments against these people in Turkey. It was the AKP government which stopped legal proceedings against the IHH. So undoubtedly, this AKP government's taken a very different attitude towards these kind of organizations within Turkish civil society. And it does look indeed as though they've been happy to allow the IHH to facilitate the possibility of them making this flotilla and getting it going. And I don't think they expected, or anybody expected, the result which we've seen this week, but I think they're quite willing to make political capital out of it now.
Well, how far do you think that they're going to take it? Is Turkey going to continue pushing its anti-Israel line, perhaps eventually cutting off diplomatic relations, cutting off whatever strategic contacts we had? We even sell them weapons. Many thousands of Israeli tourists visit there. Do they want to sever everything between us and them?
I think that if we look at the AKP itself, of course the AKP is not a dictatorial regime in Turkey which can rule by itself. They may not stay in government for the future. But certainly if we look at the culture of the AKP itself, then the answer, I think, is yes. I think that the AKP has taken a strategic decision, would like to see Turkey fundamentally realign itself in this region. And it's not only a question of what it's been doing with regard to Israel and the Palestinians. We look at the way in which this government is drawing closer to Syria also. We look at the way in which this Turkish government has been dealing with Iran and Iranian nuclear ambitions. And we saw in recent weeks this Brazilian-Turkish deal for the export of Iranian uranium. Yes, I think this government, AKP government, has taken a strategic turn to try to fundamentally realign Turkey's regional alliances, and that means in the longer term, not necessarily next week, not necessarily because of this particular incident off the seas of Gaza, but in the longer term, if the AKP stay in power, then yes, I think we are looking at a real realignment going down to the very foundations of the basis of Turkey's regional stance.
At this hour, the Irish-flagged Rachel Corrie coaster ship continues to stream across Mediterranean waters and may reach the shores off the coast of Gaza later this evening. The ship was initially part of Monday's flotilla, but was delayed by technical problems. Activists aboard say that they remain determined to deliver their aid directly to the people of Gaza rather than accept Israel's offer to dock in Ashdod. Foreign Ministry Director General Yossi Gal today reiterated that Israel has no interest in a confrontation with those aboard the vessel. Gal added that Israel has no interest in boarding the ship, and if Israel's offer is accepted, the Rachel Corrie crew and passengers would be safely secured in Ashdod, while the cargo would be unloaded and undergo a security check and then delivered to Gaza by Israel if no contraband items were discovered. There have been conflicting reports whether the Rachel Corrie would indeed continue sailing in its attempt to breach Israel's blockade of the Hamas-controlled territory, including allegations of Israeli sabotage of accompanying ships carrying journalists, causing further delay. In other news, Jerusalem police confiscated the Israeli identity cards of 4 Hamas legislators overnight, saying that the 4 must leave the country by July. Mohammed Abu Tir, Mahmoud Totah, Khalid Abu Arafa, and Ahmed Abu Atun Allah all refused to relinquish their positions on the Hamas Legislative Council, despite previous warnings from Israel that failure to do so would risk their residency rights in Jerusalem. Abu Tir was released from prison 1 month ago after being in prison for 4 years. He was arrested along with 65 other senior Hamas members in response to the abduction of IDF soldier Gilad Shalit in 2006. Following his release, Abu Tir has been prohibited from entering the capital. Jerusalem police were on high alert today, tightening security ahead of the Muslim prayers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the Old City. The move came in an effort to prevent potential clashes from demonstrators in reaction to Monday's raid. Entrance to the compound was restricted to Muslim men over the age of 40 and in possession of Israeli identification cards. No limitations were placed on female worshippers. Police reported specific intelligence warnings that several young Palestinian men intended to begin demonstrations after the close of prayers. Today's services ended peacefully and without reported incident. Turning to diplomatic news, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with U.S. Special Middle East Envoy George Mitchell in Jerusalem this morning. This as part of the third round of proximity talks since the beginning of the latest phase of negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians began last month. Mitchell met with Defense Minister Ehud Barak last night after holding talks with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah on Wednesday. The United States has been trying to restart direct peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians, but progress has severely lagged in recent months. U.S. President Barack Obama has been pushing to reinvigorate the peace process and is slated to meet next with Abbas in Washington on June 9th. Prime Minister Netanyahu was forced to cancel his own summit with Obama, scheduled to take place last Tuesday in Washington, in order to return to Israel in the wake of Monday's naval raid. One question that Israelis and the nation's supporters around the world have been asking this week is why Israel's public relations, known as Hasbara in Hebrew, are in such bad shape. According to the director of NGO Monitor, Professor Gerald Steinberg, part of the problem is that Israel still hasn't learned the lessons of the new war being waged in the court of public opinion.
We have two problems. First is the narrative, the framework. Everything that Israel does, everything that Israel is involved in, is immediately labeled as aggression, oppression, violation of human rights. It's labeled without facts. And Palestinians are always victims, and they always find people on the boat who can immediately talk about inventing completely the stories to make themselves into victims. And that's one problem which is very difficult to deal with. The other one is, and it can be dealt with very intelligent, clever, creative public relations approaches. The Navy doesn't think in those terms. The IDF doesn't think in those terms. The Ministry of Defense doesn't think in those terms. And they took even the minimal that they were able to do in terms of some understanding of the way this was all going to be framed by the media and by the NGOs, and they were going to be called peace activists and human rights fighters and all of that. The film of the attacks on the soldiers that came down off the helicopters was not released for at least 12 hours after we had the film from the other side. That critical 12 hours, they just don't get it in the military, in the structure, this Israeli security structure. I think the foreign ministry begins to understand it. The prime minister's office understands it. Now the military has to understand this is a different kind of war. You would have thought after Gaza, after Goldstone, after Jenin, they would have finally taken some serious measures. They moved part of the way, the paintball and not opening fire as they were coming down, but they didn't take the bigger picture into account.
And what do you think we can do to try to repair some of the really devastating damage that has been done to Israel's image by this last incident?
There is a certain return, I would say, to sanity or rationality. The New York Times had some good pieces in it. Even The Guardian had a good piece talking about the fact that these were not peace activists. They were very violent jihadists. Al Jazeera even had a clip showing them singing songs and acting in a way that's just consistent with a jihadist approach, and that's been picked up by the BBC. So there is a little bit of a pulling back. A lot of the damage is done. We're not going to win this war, but there's going to be more. It might be in a day or two when that next boat comes in. There's got to be lessons. There's got to be more creative thinking in terms of how do you deal with the images, how do you deal with the demonization that is so widespread. It's not going to be easy.
Staying with efforts to counter world criticism of Israel, and the right-wing satirical Latma website released its own rendition of the well-known collaborative song We Are the World, highlighting alleged terrorist connections maintained by the flotilla activists, and retitled We Con the World.
There comes a time when we need to make a show for the world, the web and CNN. There's no people dying, so the best that we can do is create the greatest bluff of all. We must go on, pretending day by day that in Gaza there's crisis, hunger, and plague.
'Cause there are a billion vaccinated won't buy their basic needs, like some cheese and missiles for the kids.
We'll make the world abandon reason. We'll make them all believe that the Hamas is Mama Teresa.
We are peaceful travelers with guns and our own knives. The truth will never find its way to your TV. Oh, we'll stab them at heart. The soldiers, no one cares. We are smart, and we took some pictures with doves. As Allah shown us, for facts there's no demand, so we will always gain the upper hand. We'll make the world abandon reason. We'll make them all believe that the Hamas is Mama Teresa. We are peaceful travelers. We're waving our own knives. The truth will never find its way to your TV. If Islam and terror brighten up your mood, but you worry that it may not look so good.
Well, don't you realize you just gotta call yourself an activist for peace and human aid?
We'll make the world abandon reason. We'll make them all believe that the Hamas is Mama Teresa. We are peaceful travelers. We're waving our own knives. The truth will never find its way to your TV. We calm the world. We calm the people.
One of the problems with Israel's efforts to disseminate information, according to political consultant Mitchell Barak, is that the country has always relied on the truth. Barak told IBA's Steve Leibowitz that this approach is ineffective and that a new strategy of public diplomacy is now necessary.
We've fallen into the trap for the past 62 years in that because we are right, because we feel just in what we do, therefore the truth will eventually come out and the world will be on our side. But in today's world, in today's media, don't confuse us with the facts. Nobody's interested in that. And we keep thinking that we're doing the right thing, and because we're doing the right thing, and because God has given us the land and all of these great stories, that we will be able to prove our justness and the world will be on our side.
Well, some people, some good people, not even enemies of Israel, but just average citizens in Europe today that are reading their local newspapers and are reading the headlines which make Israel out to be some kind of a monster. How, especially with the foreign minister that we have today, who barely can make his voice heard, he can barely appear on Israel's behalf, unfortunately. What can its citizens possibly do to try to help improve the situation?
I think it's too late for the citizens to really do anything at this point. I mean, if even people that have connections with the people living outside of Israel are feeling the heat. Everyone's feeling the heat now, and even when you reach out to the close circle of people that you know that are supporters of Israel, like I did yesterday, people say, even among the pro-Israeli community, people think Israel has gone too far. I think part of the problem is as you mentioned, the positions in Washington and New York, where we keep appointing people into foreign positions that can't speak the language necessarily, that don't have good media appearance, they can't be on television, and we really need to think more about public diplomacy. Who's going to get out there and fight, and who's going to be a public face of Israel? And oftentimes the person that gets these jobs is, you know, political payback or a favor for someone, and we really don't think about the consequences of that. That's one area. The other thing is there has to be a well thought out process of what Israel's policies, how it will affect world opinion. Now, it was a step in the right direction, having a minister that deals with Hasbara, with public diplomacy. But those kind of issues have to be covered in cabinet meetings. You know, we also don't think that, you know, there's a Jewish community around the world, and they bear the brunt of Israel's policies. And a lot of those people are getting fed up as well. Meaning when Israel attacks a ship or tries to take over a ship that may or may not have weapons traveling to Gaza, there are synagogues that are attacked and going to be attacked because of it. And we really have to think how the Jewish communities, how the local people are going to react in those cases.
Cyberspace bloggers are calling a 16-year-old American Jewish boy a hero for his actions during an anti-Israel protest rally on Monday held outside the Israeli consulate in Los Angeles. Daniel Parag paced off alone against an angry mob of largely pro-Arab demonstrators chanting Allahu Akbar, or God is great, in Arabic. The teenager appeared undeterred by shouts and curses as he marched alone while carrying a large Israeli flag. Parag later told reporters that the demonstrators attempted to pull down the Israeli flag, but he wasn't afraid because he saw several police officers, who apparently were concerned for his safety, headed toward him.
Why did you come out today?
I came out because I want to support Israel, because they were attacking.
What's your curve?
When they had the right. They were attacked first, they did what they had to. These people were not humanitarians, all right?
In financial news, the shekel put in a mixed performance in foreign currency trading today. Here's a look at the exchange rates. The IBA weather team tells us we can expect fair conditions and no significant change in temperatures tomorrow. Here's the forecast at home and abroad for the next 24 hours. That's the end of our broadcast this evening. I'm Erin Viner. Thanks for watching IBA News this evening, and we hope you'll tune in again tomorrow at 6 o'clock when I'll be here with more news and analysis from Israel and abroad. Have a wonderful evening, and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem.